How's it going, everyone? This is your co-host, Dervin, with Synonyms of Sound.
And this is your second co-host, Tony, with Synonyms of Sound. And I'd like to introduce Gersha Phillips. How's it going, Gersha?
Great, thank you. Nice to be here.
Awesome,
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. Very, very interested and anxious for this episode here. To just learn more about your creative process.
I think it's a good anxious because you are known for much more than the particular film that's out there today. Mm-hmm. You've had many awards throughout the years, and your resume of shows and things that you worked on is quite extensive. Mm-hmm. But before we get into that entire list, the awards and the current blockbuster, The Woman King that's out today, would love to know a little bit more about yourself, a little bit more about your upbringing, where you're from, where you were born, what got you into costume design, which most people may not know. But yes, you were a costume designer, a nominated costume designer, and done some amazing shows. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I was born in England. My parents my mom is from Trinidad and my dad is from Nigeria. I haven't actually been to Nigeria yet myself, but now that I've been to South Africa, which is my first foray into the continent. So that's the beginning. And we moved to Canada when I was 12 and started in Saskatchewan, which is one of the prairie provinces. So we lived in a town called Lanigan, population 1,000. That was our first foray into Canada. And so that was quite a
small city.
Yeah, small place. We were the first of many things. I was the first Black person in my high school. Our family, there were 3 of us in school at the time, and we were the first Black kids in the school. So, we had some really interesting experiences being in a prairie town, province, et cetera, et cetera. And then we were there for 3 years, and we moved to Saskatoon, and Saskatoon's where I spent my high school years, a little bit of university, and started my career actually in fashion design, which is where I started and what I decided I wanted to be when I finished high school. And so I sort of worked towards that. I did a little bit of schooling in Saskatoon at the University of Saskatchewan, but the program wasn't really that fashion oriented. So I decided I want to move to Toronto to go to one of the fashion schools in Toronto. And at that time, the best place to go to was Ryerson or Seneca. So I applied to all 3 and got into 3 schools, actually. And then I was going to go that year, but I couldn't afford to go the first year. So I moved anyway. And
what was the application process for that? Because I feel like within fashion design, either you need to have like a portfolio of pieces or sometimes have to make some stuff. So were you drawing then?
Yeah, you had a portfolio. And I had already been designing quite a bit in Saskatoon. I had my own line.
Oh, wow.
Partly I did it with my boyfriend, then I did it by myself. I started by...
What was your line's called?
It was called GV Fashions, which is kind of
fun. Okay. You kind of skipped over the name, so I was like, I want to get the name.
It started with our 2 names. My name's Gersha, obviously, and his name was Victor, so the GV was sort of like our 2 names blended together. So that's what we started calling ourselves. But I started by making costumes for breakdancers. That's how I started back in the day. There were, obviously being in the Prairie Province, they couldn't find
breakdance a little bit back in the day.
So I started by making breakdance. And also like baggy pants and suits and just, cooler stuff that you weren't able to buy there. And that started because I, was making my own clothes. I couldn't, from the time, I can't remember exactly when I started sewing myself. My mom sewed, my grandmother sewed, so it sort of got passed down to me as well. And I would make my own clothes. People would see what I was making, or I would fix things and change things, and, they'd see what I was making and either ask me to make something similar, or could I do this for them, or whatever. So that's how it started, actually. And then, I started doing the breakdown, the breakdancing costumes, and then was asked by a company this woman that I knew, a friend of mine, who was opening a store called Vila Moda in Saskatoon. And so she asked me to make things for her store, and that's just sort of kept going and snowballing. And then eventually I decided that I wanted to take it further and take my career further. And so decided to move to Toronto. And, during that time, too, a huge inspiration of mine was fashion, obviously. Karl Lagerfeld, Jean-Paul Gaultier, John Galliano. Like, those guys were really big at the time. And I remember there used to be this show called Fashion Television. Gina Beck, who used to do it. And she would interview these guys, and they would talk about their inspirations for each season of the show. And they always had these great stories that you would go on, the ideas of how they would, whether it was some, based on a time of an era, a time in history, or something else, a painting or whatever it was. It was really interesting. But I love that idea of telling a story with clothes already. And I think that just hit me lately, that I realized that that's where that comes from. Or that's where sort of the seed got planted, I would say, was by watching, these guys talk so eloquently and so beautifully about what their fashions were about. So that was, something that I feel like probably got embedded in me pretty early. But what happened to me was I was living in Toronto working. I worked for a line here, and I was doing like pattern drafting and things like that. And I went to see the movie Beaches, which
Beaches, okay.
I know it has nothing to do with the movie. I don't think. I just feel like it was just one of those things that happened. I remember the title card, costume designer, came up on the screen, and for whatever reason, that was my moment. As Oprah says, and I've said it before, it was my aha moment. I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. So I, tried to figure out how I was going to do that in Toronto. I had known that there was an industry in Toronto that was already bubbling at the time. And, everyone I talked to in the beginning were like, oh, you can't get in there. You're never going to get in. It's too hard to get in. It's, blah, blah, blah. But in the end, I ended up meeting this guy who was a boom operator. And he told me the best thing to do was to volunteer at the Canadian Film Centre. So I ended up volunteering on a film they were doing. That it was the fall of '95, I believe. And
is that Why I Never Trust You?
Pardon me?
Is it the film Why I'll Never Trust You? Was that their first?
It was called House.
House, okay.
House, yeah, and it was written by Daniel MacGyver, and the director was Laurie Lind. And it was I just remember going. The process, I think I did about 4 weeks, maybe not even 4 weeks prep, I think, before we went to camera, and that was interesting enough. But I remember my biggest thing was always like being on the set, because up until, I think when I decided I want to be a costume designer, I remember one night, like stumbling on a set, like walking around in Toronto and just finding one and going, so this is a movie set. And, you can't see much because it's all cordoned off. At that time, they used to be try to keep it very separate. And just looking at I think I stood there for like an hour, and I don't even know what I was looking at the time, but it just was exciting to me. So I knew this was, I was heading in the right direction. So anyway, I worked on this film. I started as a costume assistant and assisted the designer and worked on the truck. And, we had to rig a truck because we didn't really have a proper truck because it was really low budget. And from that film, I ended up designing 2 shorts. I got asked to do 2 shorts. And then from then on, it was always like, I'd join the union afterwards and designed like smaller budget things, and then did larger budget things on the side. Worked as a set key and those other positions, like worked through all the positions in the department. So I think my first big film I call real film was a movie called Prisoner of Love I did with Naomi Campbell. And that's sort of like the first... I don't know. It just felt a little bit bigger. It had international actors. Campbell was the star of it, blah, 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 blah. So it was just kind of like a really interesting journey. It wasn't like the greatest story, but it was an interesting, for me, I felt like I learned a lot. And then from there, I did a movie called The Five Senses, which I feel is another one of those really great moments with a director called Jeremy Podesqua. And we've actually tried to work together since then several times, but haven't been able to. And then after that, I did Narc as well, which was also another really cool piece. working with Joe Carnahan and Ray Liotta, Jason Patrick, and Busta Rhymes. And that sort of set the ground for, my type of films, the stuff I did do. Like I did a series called Drop the Beat, which was an urban hip hop Canadian series. So I learned a lot about the hip hop industry, and then that led me to like Platinum, and then, working with Ice Cube and all of these different kinds of options, these other kinds of projects that I did. So I don't know, that's enough backstory there.
I mean, that's a great backstory, and I feel like you were super prepared for my questions, so I appreciate that.
Oh. Yeah, I kind of answered it a few times. Yeah, but yeah, it was, I figure it's interesting because people ask and they always want to know how to get into the industry, and I feel like there's many different ways to get in. Mine is it's not that singular to myself. I feel like a lot of people are not that similar to me, in fact, in their journeys. So.
I feel in life it's all about being in the right place at the right time sometimes and knowing the right people.
Yeah, I think that also just having that sort of, you gotta, I wasn't young when I started in the business, so I feel like for me that probably helped me a lot because I do feel like there's a lot of BS and a lot of, nepotism that you have to get through and understand, and that can be a little put offing, and I think that if you can get through that, you have a chance of staying, I think obviously I do really think for me it was because I was a little older, I was able to handle more, and I was a little bit more tenacious. So that helped too. Besides all because I didn't really know hardly anybody except for this one guy that I was able to talk to, and he said, "Do this," and I did that, and then that helped me, and it opened the door. So I do think, I guess that is, I didn't really know him, but meeting him was great. It was a very fortuitous meeting. So yeah.
Okay. I'll also say one thing that's important too. Like, I feel a lot of times people feel in the movie business or in the industry as a whole is that they want immediate gratification right away, and it needs to be big, it needs to be huge. They don't assume that everyone had to start from literally nothing and work their way up, and that there's a lot of doors that are going to stop you and a lot of no's before you get the big yes and the big opportunity. So I think perseverance on top of talent and hard work and dedication is probably the recipe to success, I believe.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think that's true of everything. But I will say in film that, yes, you do have a lot of no's. There are a lot of no's you got to put up with. So you do have to have that perseverance for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
In podcasting too, there's a lot of no's. We reached out to some people and they're like, no, I'm not interested. No, yes. So there's a lot of no's, but it's perseverance and hopefully with eventually good content that you start to get a lot of yes. So
cool.
Same in the podcast world.
Yeah.
Before stepping into the opportunity to work on this movie, were you familiar with just the historical context behind it at all, or did you kind of learn more when getting engaged with the project?
No, I didn't. I mean, I remember hearing about a documentary that Lupita did. And I never saw the documentary until I started interviewing for the movie. But I do remember hearing about the women that inspired the Dora Milaje. So I knew that existed. I just didn't, I was busy on Star Trek, and Star Trek's a thing that is all consuming, and it's all consuming for like 11 months of the year. Especially because I did, especially that year in particular, I think I did. I've been doing like Star Trek shorts, and then also setting up, Strange New Worlds. And we also were going to do this other series in between, the one with Section 31 that sort of got greenlit and then it went down again. So, I've been busy in that world for so long that I haven't really been paying attention to much else, unfortunately. I mean, I definitely saw Black Panther. So, yeah. But that's... I didn't really know much about it at all. It was really, it was interesting. When my agent sent me, first she sent me the email and said, well, this could happen, and Gina and Kathy want to meet you. And, that's when I started, basically. And I think.
So do you get to read the script to understand? So you do get the opportunity to read the script to envision how you're going to.
Available, they'll give you a script or an outline. Usually, most jobs I've gotten scripts so far. Yeah. So you get a script and you read the script before you you then it gives you an opportunity to decide what you want to do. I usually do some sort of a presentation, and depending on the job, I might get some illustrations done. Like for this one, I definitely had illustrations ready. Like I was like, I want this job when it came up, and I was very. I think my presentation, I forget how many pages it was, but it was not short. It was a long presentation. I sat with Gina and those guys. We took them through, first we talked about myself. We talked about things I'd done. I'd show them a bit of my work, and then we jumped into the presentation. So it was a cool meeting.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when first hearing about the film, just someone avidly interested in history, but also I'm Haitian, just in terms of my background. So I was extremely excited to just hear that. The story about this kingdom and this tribe in particular would be on screen. I was a little disappointed with the time period they chose, hoping that they would tie it in a little earlier to just its significance to Haiti and the Western Hemisphere and how that all ties in. But are you familiar with that at all?
No, I'm not. I'm like, what's? I don't even know what you're talking about there. What's the significance with Haiti?
So Haiti first, in the Western Hemisphere, first black country to essentially abolish slavery, and they pretty much went on a world tour afterwards and helping other countries fight for their independence, and also sending out a message saying that anyone free, essentially anyone enslaved who can get to our soil would be considered free on Haitian grounds. But the man who defeated...
Sorry, when did that take place? Is that
so? Haiti officially abolished slavery officially in 1804. I believe the Woman King is the 1820s that it's set in.
1823, yeah.
How it ties together is that a woman by the name of Abderrahmane Toya, who would take on a slave name of Victoria Montu, essentially was a Dahomey tribe warrior who was captured and enslaved, and she ended up in Haiti. She would then go on to actually raise the man who defeated Napoleon and abolished slavery.
Oh, wow. So that's that Toussaint Louverture.
So this is Jean-Jacques Dessalines. This is after Toussaint is imprisoned in France and he dies. Jean-Jacques Dessalines is the one who takes over afterwards. But it's so dope because he called her Auntie Toya. But
really?
She essentially raised him, taught him everything. She's honored quite significantly when she passes away after they abolish slavery and things of those sorts. So there's a lot of primary sources that talk about her. I'd hoped that the movie would tie that in some way, especially with what's going on in Haiti now. I feel like,
But Durbin, really we're putting this into the universe right now, and I think we're speaking to the right person.
It sounds like an amazing story to be told. And I think that's one of the great things about this film and the success it's having is that it's going to open the door for more of that to happen, and I think that's a really important, factor. So.
I feel Star Wars did it. They started in the future and then went backwards. So we could do that. We're speaking to Gersha. She'll let people know that we brought up the idea. And we should get some producing credit. And, she'll design the stuff for us.
No, that absolutely would be awesome.
That's a great, it's an amazing story. I think, the story that they told, it's because somebody else wrote this and took the story to Viola. So it was somebody else's script that was, I think it's the Maria Bellows and Dana, the writer, the two of them had the script. They wrote the script and they took it to Viola. So I think, again, how things are gestated, how they go forward is a big part of the system, unfortunately, in Hollywood and the system to making movies. So if you can get a script together and get it to Viola, maybe they can do
We'll work on it.
Yeah.
We can definitely try to see something.
Mm-hmm.
So how has your experience with Star Trek been for you so far? Because I feel two projects you're kind of tied to as of late have really powerful Black female lead characters.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this was coincidental or very purposeful in how you pick your projects, but tell us a little bit about Star Trek. And I think that's one of the first awards you received in regards to your costume design, correct?
Well, actually,
so walk us a little bit through that.
Yeah, I think, Star Trek was sort of like an accident because I feel like it fell upon me, or maybe it was meant to be. You never know, like with the way the universe works, it's like, it could be anything. But like when I was called about Star Trek, I was called to assist another designer, like help a designer do the show. Because she was working with Brian Fuller and they were on American Gods at the time. And producer Kevin, he called me and said, would you help Sudarat get this show on the ground? He's on this other show. We need somebody to bridge till we start filming. And we were supposed to start filming in September that year. And this was July. And I was in Rome, actually, and I was doing research for Ruth on Black Panther at the time. And I just finished a project and I was like, I'm staying here. I love it. I'm just going to chill. So I was quite happy to do that. But then I happened to mention it to my brothers. So I think it was just when they started calling me, it was around my birthday. So my brothers were all calling me. And of course, they're huge Trek fans, beyond. And they're like,
I'm a big Trek fan.
You have to do this show. You have to do this show. And at the time, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know that they were looking for a black lead. I didn't know anything. I just knew that Brian Fuller.
Have you seen the Chris Pine ones? The Chris Pine Star Trek movies are also really good.
Yeah.
Have you seen those?
Of course.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I'm just making sure.
I kind of prefer the classic Star Trek stuff. The more newer stuff, I'm not too sure. I'm a big Star Trek fan. But like old
the classics are good too. The classics are good too. The classics are good too.
He's the purist. Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's my guy.
Yeah. I can see it already. Do you like the new Strange New World? What do you think of that remake?
I haven't seen it all. Okay. I have seen some of it. The television series. I can't just judge it yet. I gotta see more than a few episodes. But visually, it does look dope.
I think a lot of people really like it, and especially it pays homage to the original series much more in terms of the look, etc. So, for our show, when we were doing Disco, and Brian Fuller's agenda or, decisions were, I don't want it to look like any tracks that have come before. I want it to have its own look and be completely singular. So that was our agenda for Sudarat and I. So the other designer was Sudarat. So I started on the show, like basically trying to figure out where we're going to get our fabrics, how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that, and set up the department. So that's how I started. And, then it was like, well, you can do Vulcans. So I started designing Vulcans as my own thing. So I always had like this little special affinity for the Vulcans. And I remember showing Brian fabrics in the beginning. Like we would do these like weekly meetings, and I showed him fabrics I picked for the Vulcans, and he was like, those aren't alien enough. You need to get more alien fabrics. So that started my, understanding, at least in terms of what level we wanted it to be and where we wanted to go to. So definitely something that looked more otherworldly. So I had to go out and find textiles that were definitely more interesting, more unknown, and that sort of on that path, and then also add elements by doing other things. So that started that journey. And then Brian left the show in October, because we already pushed then. Again, we were going to shoot by then. I think the next date was November. And then he left the show in October. Sudarat left with him, and they asked me if I would take over. And that's how that journey started. And then Sonequa wasn't hired until I think December, because there were a few people that came through in terms of women that they were looking at. And but I think they met Sonequa early, and they knew that's who they wanted. But she wasn't available till this date, and it was after the date that the studios wanted to shoot. But I think Brian knew that that's who it had to be from the beginning. That's my take on it anyway. And so we didn't.
She did a great job. Love the show. She does a great job. Great job.
She's such an amazing person. She's just the most generous and the one of the best number ones I've ever worked with in terms of that journey and working with that actor and what they do in terms of setting up the way our sets are, how it feels when we're on set, the family that's created from it. Like I have to say, it's just really beautiful, and a lot of it stems from her. And everybody else is so willing to take it up, because I have to say, like that Trek group of actors are amazing. Like I have not worked with such a great team in terms of camaraderie and I don't know. They actually operate like a family. They really do. And I mean, I guess other people say that about other shows, but for me, that feeling and that working with these guys was definitely felt like that. So it was really wonderful. And it was a hard decision to leave, I have to say. But I was just like, I think I need to go do something else. Because I was there for 5 years.
I was going to ask next, do you like doing series versus movies? Because movies kind of like...
Movies are my thing. Yeah. I like a true beginning, middle, and end. I like that idea. I don't mind a limited series. That idea of doing, like, I did 4 years of Trek. It was just felt like this never ending thing. And the thing about it is it's really, really a massive show to do. Like the amount of building that we do, and everything it's a pretty intense load. So,
got it.
The thing about that series in particular was that, it was so creative. I got to be like, I don't think I've ever flexed that muscle so much as I did on that journey. So it was really great. And I learned so much about building on many levels. So it's really, really great. Yeah.
Cool.
Because one of the things I like to do, especially is do as much building in-house rather than sending it out. Because a lot of shows will send their super suits out, and we did too in the beginning. Like our first space suits were made by FBFX in London, and Alchemy did the other suit, the crazy Klingon suit. And then slowly we started learning how to build ourselves and how to do things in-house, which I think really, especially when we bumped to the future, the 1,000 years, it really helped us in terms of, how we were going to manufacture those costumes, because we really wanted it to look different and more, solidly different than the first set of things, because it was really funny. I really thought we had done such a great job of that first, those first things and everything. I was pretty happy, and what we did with the Mirror Universe, and especially when we got to redo Mirror Universe, it felt really good. And then the next thing they were like, well, we're going to jump to the future 1,000 years. So you're going to have to redo everything that you've done and start over again. So that was, it was ridiculous at that time. I was like, I don't even know what I'm going to do. It took me forever to make those decisions and figure out how we were going to build them and make them different. Because we already were streamlining everything, in terms of the way we built. So it was really interesting to try to come up with new ways of doing that, even more streamlined. So.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever like kind of clash with makeup? Just when you're working on costume designs?
Not really makeup. I don't think. Well, for one thing, I worked with another. I've been lucky enough to work with some really great teams. So on Star Trek Discovery, I started with Ryan and Chris. And Ryan and I go way back, so we have a relationship. And Ryan's hair, Chris's makeup. I think the only person, I wouldn't call it a clash, but we definitely had some things that we needed to figure out was with prosthetics. Because they're the ones that we have more interaction with. And what would happen is we would get, because of the timing and because Alchemy worked in LA, we were in Toronto, we would get the prosthetics and need to integrate them into the costumes, and we'd have no time. So that became that was really difficult, and we definitely had some conversations about that, because it was hard to react to what we needed to react to without the proper information, and even by going to their studios and getting things, checking, and it's not really anybody's fault. I would say it's just the working in different cities like that, and then trying to put a costume together with like such little time, because their process takes a long time, our process takes a long time, and then you bring it together, and if they don't work together really well, then you're in trouble. So, and that's what happened to us a few times, where we had to come up with some, pretty fast MacGyver techniques to make the two things blend together.
What would you say was the favorite costume you've designed so far?
Wow. I think, I definitely loved the episode. You mean on that show? We're not talking.
Period. Like any project. Yeah.
Well, it still probably would be Trek costumes, but I do really love my Woman King costumes too, though. Those are pretty, monumental and exciting. I love Viola's battle uniform. I loved, what else was my favorite? The dance at the end. And I love all Jimmy's costumes, even though they're up for contention. But I love Jimmy's Oyo costumes. That thing had so many good. But I also feel like Star Trek had like a lot of them. Like obviously, the spacesuits from 11 from the last season, season 4, at the end. The Red Angel suit from the year before. I also really, the Mirror Universe costumes are some of my faves. The Emperor Giorgio and those things are really great. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, a lot of those ones are really great. So,
gotcha.
But, I know you follow up with all kinds of different things depending on what you're doing, because obviously working in space, has a different set. And I also really love the Vulcan costumes. I forgot about those. You know what I mean? So I have a lot of.
Can't forget the Vulcans.
Yeah.
So, I know the Women King is doing great. They don't need any extra marketing, but we're just going to dive into that just a little bit more. So, you mentioned that you were able to get the script for the movie before pitching your idea. Yeah. Did they tell you who the actresses were or actors were?
The only actress that I knew at the time was Viola.
Okay. Was that a driving decision for you to take the opportunity or want it, or you read the script and was like, you know what, this is a powerful story? Yeah. They're both powerful. Viola's powerful.
Well, I kind of got, this is what I got in the first email. It was, there's going to be this movie. This is the name of it. It's set in this time. The director is Viola, is Gina Prince Blythe. Come on. And then, produced by Kathy, who I didn't know. I had to do a little research. She also has quite a resume. And that Viola's company was producing it, and she was going to be the lead in it. So that's the email that all comes together. And then you get the script right after. So already then I was like, of course I want to do this movie. It sounds phenomenal. A female-led group of warriors. Come on. I mean, anyway. So after that, I read the script, and even more so, at first I read it and I think, oh, it's not so big. And then I think I read it the second time. I was like, it's huge. And then, you start to do the research, and you start to figure out what are these guys going to look like? Because they do mention they describe things in the script. And so you start to do that research. So we started to do the research, and once I got hired, even before that, because I wanted to do these illustrations. So I did my illustrations based on the research that I found. And it was those pictures of, when you Google the Yagoji, you see these pictures of them with the cavalry breastplates, the plumes, and the red and white skirts. And so that's where my first illustration started. I just did the battle uniform, because that's how it's described. And I was like, and then when I got the job and started to, I think even my second round of illustrations, my second interview, I changed the illustrations, because I remember reading the script the day of my interview with Gina. I realized as I was reading that my illustrations were wrong. The pose I had picked for her, I wanted her in movement, because I don't know why that talked to me at the time. So I did this pose of her running, and she's got her machete in her hand, and then I followed those pictures that are online with the longest skirt, the cavalry breastplate, and everything. And then when I was looking at that, I realized that how are they going to run in that skirt? How are they going to fight in that skirt? That's what came to me, because I had her running, and I was like, this isn't going to work. And also the running pose didn't make sense for Viola, because she's a general. And as I read it, then I was like, she should be stoic and standing really strongly. And so after that, the second interview, I changed all my illustrations to a different pose. I slightly shortened the skirt, but kept most of the same things by then. I didn't change it until after, I think what we found was that, when I started doing research, I couldn't find the description of this uniform anywhere that was depicted in these pictures. Like, they just didn't exist. What they described was more like what we did, and then also a palace tunic with the two uniforms that were described more. The tunic made of the heavy cotton. And so it wasn't until 2 weeks before we started shooting, I think, that we found, the historian was found before, but he wasn't allowed. There was some red tape in Sony, so we weren't allowed to talk to him until like 2 weeks before we started shooting. And that's when he was the one who said, no, they never wore these chests. They did. This is not what they wore. This was a redress for the World Trade Fair when they were, put on display, and they went around the world and did fake skirmishes. There's a picture of them doing skirmishes. And it was interesting, because after that I started looking at the pictures a little closely, and I was like, It's right, because you can tell these women are not warriors in these pictures. They don't look like warriors. Their bodies aren't, warrior-like. They don't have that strength or anything about them. So that's, that was an interesting journey, because it was, you get fed something and you think this is what the real thing is, and then unless you do the actual research, you don't find out till after. And it's giving a nice little smile there.
I told you that's my historian. That's my historian right there. So
what we really needed was a historian from the beginning. Like, that's what we should have had, I feel, because it was like this ongoing journey of researching while you're doing a movie and while you're trying to make the costumes. When I didn't have enough time to research in the beginning. And the research also was difficult to go through, because you were, most of the research is from a male perspective and a white male perspective. And it's very, the descriptions are degrading and it's hard to read, what it means. You've got to slug through all of this stuff to find the things that you want to find. So it's quite, that was,
on that note, Dervin tells me this interesting quote all the time. History is written by the winners.
Yes.
So we always get one particular perspective. Yeah. And you see he's smiling again because he's like, that was me.
No, I know. I think I've heard it. I've heard something similar. Yeah.
What's a better quote? Let me hear it.
An even better quote from, in my opinion, an asshole. It's Napoleon. But history is a set of lies agreed upon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and it's so true. And this is the thing, and it's such a difficult thing to navigate, you know what I mean? Because if you're trying to tell a story that's supposedly set in history and is true, and then you're telling the story, and then what happens is that the next generation look at that story and they think that's what is real history. Like, I've talked to my daughter about so many things, and she'll be like, "Oh, I thought that was just something from The Simpsons." Like, she doesn't realize that The Simpsons used real history and then showed it on that show. You know what I mean? In terms of, like, I don't know, I can't think of something particular, but some person in history that would be on The Simpsons, and then they would do, a little skit on it, and then she would think that was just a story. She didn't realize that person was a real person. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's just this sort of reinterpretation of history and things in the past. And I feel like Hollywood is unfortunately very good with that. And I mean, I work in that industry, but it is interesting that...
But Hollywood also does some good things too.
Yes.
For example, with Watchmen, when they talked about the whole Tulsa situation in that particular show and what happened there, I had no idea that was a real thing, that there was this thriving Black community that was burnt down and destroyed overnight. No idea. So I was watching Watchmen. This can't be real. And I Google this, and it's real. And I'm like, how come we've never been taught this in our history books?
Yeah.
And this is like thousands of people.
Would you teach it?
I mean, no, but it's just interesting that how that something so like historical and so like so terrible happened to the Black community, and I had no idea. And I was watching an HBO comic book series, and that's how I learned about this thing.
No, that's true.
I was like, this is so backwards.
Yeah.
Some might argue that it's made or it's been brought to the big screen because it isn't the I guess the worst of the tragedies and that kind of.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah,
that's a good point.
It's probably there's layers, and that's that's unfortunate. Yeah.
With the Woman King though, like that kingdom, there's just so much. You know what I mean? There's so much, and from like a costume design perspective as well, like trying to tie in or be mindful of the history of how I guess they portrayed themselves. I mean, how that might have changed from like the 1600s to 1904 is so vast. So it is really awesome to hear that that y'all wanted to be mindful of that and wanted to make sure.
No, we really did. I mean, as I was talking before, is the studio sees a show as a means of, how do I say this without sounding I don't know, but I feel like the studio has an agenda that they want to get out, or not necessarily an agenda, but their goal is
movies are made to make profits. I'll say it for you, like they're put on the big screen to make profits.
Yes,
and at the same time, I think what was, and this is probably my own personal opinion, I think what was probably even harder for you guys in regards to the story and what you guys were trying to get done is that it was an all Black female-led cast.
Exactly.
And if you guys tank, the likelihood of another all Black female-led cast might not come anytime soon, because they want to look back at history. You guys did this and it didn't do well. So there's a line that you have to play a little bit.
Exactly.
Which I think is a good follow-up question for me is, how much creative control do you have when it comes to the design of the costume versus dealing with the writer and the producers? Like, are you fully in control, or you have to really take into consideration what they say?
No, I would say I'm fully in control of what's on the screen, because I have to go through an approval process, is what it's called.
Got it.
So I submit sketches usually, and sometimes they require to see your fitting photos as well. Like on Disco, I always had to put most cast, they would give me a list, or at least I would have an idea of the ones that they wanted to see. So I would get the illustrations done. I would send them in to approval. Sometimes I would give them multiple options to choose from. Sometimes I would only give them one, depending on time and what I was trying to, get across. But that's something that you have to do. And then they choose the one, and then you go forward with that one, and that's the one you build. So that happened on the Women King tour. It was required that Sony wanted to see my illustrations. So my first step with that is Gina and I sit down and we have a meeting, and we go through the options that I've come up with. And then from her choices, those go to the Sony, and then Sony makes choices from that. And that's how that's done.
Got it. Okay.
And they'll say, oh, we want this changed. We want you to do this. We want you to do a little bit more of this, a little less of that. And then I have to make those changes. And that is pretty much almost all designers nowadays. For these types of shows, for the budgets that we're doing, that's what's required. TV and film, actually. And then our other process is like, if you're not doing a film like this, you do fittings, and you have to show the fitting photos. Right? And
Got it.
They either approve or disapprove those. Or they may, like I just did On the Rocks with Warner Brothers and Apple TV. And so Warner Brothers didn't really say much, but Apple TV would say things. But what they would say is I would send it to say it was Don Cheadle and Janine Barrios, and I would send it to them. They would give me their notes, and then they would send it off to the studio, and the studio would give notes. And so the studios, they were more lax. They weren't like, you have to do this or change that. They were more, so it was a little different, but similar process. So
Got it. Okay.
Now, is there anything about that overall workflow that you would change or maybe improve if you had the opportunity to, like something about?
Well, I feel sometimes, you feel like they should trust us more.
I agree.
I do
You're the experts.
like they hire us because we're the experts, and usually the studio executives aren't necessarily the experts, and they're going on contemporary things because they're a lot of times they want a movie that's going to sell in a climate. So our movie is one where the words were for us the key words that were used a lot was elevate. And I understand, because obviously I would like to elevate as well, and I want to show a Dahomey Kingdom that is sort of what it would have been as best we can recall it. And the thing that they always want you to do now is to boost it for this audience, because this, you guys, because you're younger, that you can't look at something and understand what it should look like, or understand the wealth of it if it doesn't look wealthy to your eyes. So if you're not seeing the gold, if you're not seeing the wealthy fabrics, if you're not seeing those things, you don't understand it to be a wealthy kingdom. Right. So that's the thing that they do have us do, where we have to elevate it so that this new younger audience, it appeals to them and they can understand it and they want to see it. And that's, one of the things that was required of our show. So, and I understand it to a certain extent, but I do think there's some things that they maybe should have left as they were.
Gotcha.
That's my honest opinion. So I don't know if that ends up in your interview, but hopefully it doesn't affect you getting other jobs.
Of course not. Your work speaks for itself. I'm sure that won't affect you. But one thing
I do feel like when I work with certain people, they really trust me. Like I just spent, my 4 years in 5 years on track. And I do feel like, after the first year, second year, they definitely start to trust you. And that's one thing that is nice about working on a series as opposed to film, or unless you've worked with a director more than once, then you can develop that relationship. Because, I worked very closely with Olatunde on Star Trek. And I feel like, that was such a great relationship that he trusted me completely. You know what I mean? And I think that, that's when it becomes much better, obviously. So when Olatunde gets to be head of a studio someday and I would get to work with him again, then it will be great, because then I probably won't have to go through such tape, you know what I mean? But, and I do, the thing is though, everybody's vision of what, you read something and then you visualize it a certain way, right? And I think my version of that is very different than another person's, than like Gina's or, one of our other producers. And so that is the thing, that because we're all individuals and we all have very different ideas of what we see, it's interesting to see that all come to this one head at the end. You know what I mean? Because that's sort of what has to happen. It goes from like here, where there's all these different people, and it goes into this. You know what I mean? And so it's a very interesting process that we go through, and how we get there and what ends up being on screen. It's fascinating to me. I mean, especially this one, because when I watched that, I was like, wow, it's not what I was expecting to see. I didn't get to spend a lot of time on set watching what they were shooting and that sort of thing. So, when you don't get to see that, you're not exactly sure of what they're capturing all the time. The dailies I didn't get to watch either as much as I would have liked to have. So it was interesting to see it afterwards. I mean, I feel like, what we ended up with was really great. It's better than I thought it was going to be. So that to me is a bonus, right? It's a plus.
Thumbs up. Yeah. The only other movie that I would say I felt really inspired by was Black Panther. Mm-hmm. And wanted to get your opinions and thoughts about their costume set and the representation of the Black Panther universe. Mm-hmm. And I guess after that, what's next for you? What's the next big thing? Are you going to go back into fashion design? Would love to know what's next.
Well, I'd love to. I wanted to do stuff with my Trek things, and then now I want to do stuff with my Woman King costumes as well. But we'll see what I'm going to do with that. But I think Ruth did an incredible job on Black Panther. It was, to watch it and see it, it was gorgeous and so lush, and so it's what you wanted it to be, right? In terms of creating that world, and based in what it is. So I feel like, and it's interesting when you put our two shows together, when you put them side by side sort of thing, it's interesting how the differences and the similarities, are there for sure. So I feel, and I'm very, very excited to see what she's done with season 2. I mean, with episode 2, with the next one.
Yeah. You definitely were in Star Trek for too long.
I know. Is that right? No. Because, Ruth's a good friend of mine, and I consider her to be a mentor. She says she's not my mentor, but I think she's a mentor. Because one of the very first things I did, I think in 1995, I got to work with her. It was a movie that Don Stuito was starring in, an MOW, called The Earl Manigault Story. And she was sort of like a consultant, and Denise Cronenberg was designing it, but Ruth was the consultant, and so she came in for 2 days, and I was the one who was put to work with her. We did all these fittings, and she brought all this amazing things with her, and it was such a great experience at watching somebody like that work. Because, at that time, by then, I think she'd written on Malcolm X and all these other things, and I was quite inspired by her, and so thrilled and honored to get that opportunity to work with her. It was really cool. And then we did another film called Down the Delta that I got to work with her on. So it was, it was awesome.
Cool.
So yeah, I feel, and then also because I did research on Black Panther, I do feel slightly connected to it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then my next film actually is helped thanks to Ruth again, because Ruth recommended me for this movie. It's called Captain America 4. So I'm going to be doing that.
Hold on. Captain America 4?
Yeah. With Anthony Mackie as Captain America.
Oh, I just want to make sure I was thinking the right one. That is awesome. That is sick. It's like Captain America 4. Ooh. And again, another strong, powerful Black lead actor. That's
right. I guess maybe that is my vibe these days.
That's a good vibe. That's where the energy is.
I don't mind. And I have to say, working with Viola and Gina, come on, those guys and the rest of the group, those women are formidable. They are just so incredible, and it was such a great team and a great journey to work with all of those people. And also, I have to say that, not a man, but a really great artist and great at what he does as a keen. I forget his last name now. It's not. What is it? It's a by name, but he's a production designer. He was really great too. And Polly, our DP, was also really great and great collaborators. So that was really awesome. And actually, Keen really helped a lot with the research because he worked like 6 months before me, so he had a lot more research. So I was always getting stuff from him. So he was really great.
So do you? Go, Devin. Go.
Oh, please.
Do you feel pressured with Captain America 4? Because I feel Captain America, like people love Captain America and all the Marvel movies. Yeah. And 4 is going to be a different feel because it's a different person, different costume in general.
Yeah, different director too. Yeah, Julius Ona, who's, it was interesting because when I met him, he said I had an interview with them. But yeah, no, I'm excited, but I am a little, after going through the Trek journey and having that fandom, it was really an interesting journey doing Trek and then having Trek fans not love everything we did. But it was really funny though, when I went to the Trek convention, I think in the second year, they were lovely. Like they were so amazing towards us when we were there. So it was really nice. We went with our team and people were dressed in our costumes. They would come up and talk to us and thank us for, invigorating new life into Trek and things like that. So it was a really fun experience. So I guess they grumble, but then they like it.
Got it. Okay.
We'll see what happens with this one. But yeah, he's gonna, we're continuing on from the Captain and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That's what it's called. Yeah,
Winter Soldier. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm a though avid historian on the side. I'm also a comic book connoisseur sometimes, and Isaiah Bradley. As the character for comic book, first Black Captain America. So I'm also very happy to see that they're putting Black Captain America on screen because, comic book wise, it's accurate.
Yeah, no, it is. I didn't even know. Like my brother's a huge comic book fan as well, and it's been a good help to me in terms of navigating this world and trying to understand everything because I'm not a comic book fan. I never was really growing up. So it's interesting just to try to navigate it now and understand it all. And
now there's
a lot of history and there's so many characters. It's crazy.
I've got one request. Massive. I've got one request with the design for this. There is a very famous comic book series from the 1940s on Isaiah Bradley, and the way Captain America is designed, it's almost as if he's wearing a do-rag. I'm begging
you. Did you say don't do it?
Please don't do this.
Because it makes him look like he has a do-rag on.
Please don't do it. Like with his mask. It's funny. It's something I noticed. I don't know if they do that on purpose, really.
I'm kind of curious to see it though. What you said it's from the 40s?
Yeah. The comic book is Earth 616. Let me actually find the picture right now and share my screen.
Yeah, share the screen because that might be interesting for us to see.
Yeah. Just so I know what not
to do. Advising.
Yeah.
Yep, I found it. It's from Younger Avengers, Volume 11. Let me share my screen. Here it is.
Oh, wow.
It does look like he got a dewey on.
Do you see? Kind of
yeah, and he has the little tail at the back too. He has the little tail.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it up to the 40s? Or is it wasn't drawn in the 40s?
When the character takes place.
Oh, I see. So the story is in the 40s. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Good to know.
I thought that was funny, but I mean, when you are working on your craft, like there was tons of support for the Woman King, for example, but there are also some people who were upset like about some things as well. But you kind of can't avoid that kind of thing when you're creating something at that scale or just something. Period. There's always going to be folks who have something negative to say or feel differently. when you're working on your designs and you're focused and trying to stay locked in, how do you essentially block out the noise and stay concentrated at the goal at hand?
I mean, for me, what I usually do is just dig myself into the story and the research of what I'm doing. And the other thing I'll do is I'll play music. I mean, I didn't really get music from that time. Like, there's usually, depending on what I'm doing, I'll usually play a lot of music while I'm working, and that sort of helps too. I mean, I feel like, the biggest thing though is really just, it's like that script, whatever, how many pages it is that you're working with, and that's the story you're telling. And so that becomes the guiding light, I guess I would say, to what I'm doing. And yeah, I mean, I don't really, I'm not on Instagram or Twitter at all. I dropped Twitter after COVID. I just was like, I can't take this. It's too crazy. And I'll go on Instagram very rarely. I'm not on Facebook anymore. And so I don't have a lot of that noise. And so it's mostly just, and I don't watch the news. So those things are all things I just don't participate in anymore. I just feel like it's not worth it. I like to listen to like music. It's really what I do listen to, and try to just create energy around, creativity, because that's the most important thing. That's what I'm here for. So, I try to do whatever it is to make that work for me. And usually, yeah, like I say, I feel like music is a strong component and of setting the mood. And, I like to set my space up and make sure I have some good visual stimulation around me, like, and that sort of thing too. I think for that, and Woman King especially, was like fabrics and some great, we found some great images that we were able to get together and put up. And then the illustrations I printed really big, so they were on the wall too. And it was really nice too. So when the cast came into the room, they walked into all the history. I was able to take them through, the journey of what we had sort of set up and show them their board with their images on, etc. So I mean, it's kind of that's sort of the main thing, I'd say. Yeah.
Nice.
Surrounding myself with whatever the story is.
Awesome. And any advice for any aspiring designers looking to get on a film set or a major movie project?
Well, I think we covered that a little bit in the beginning. I think you can. I mean, some people are lucky enough that they start off being Ruth Carter's assistant, or something like that, so they get to start off really big and then move on. But other people start off smaller, and I think it's there are a lot of shows, and especially a lot of Black shows, and there are a lot of really great initiatives in terms of bringing more diversity into our world, into our business, and I think that's really great. And I'm a big proprietor of that, and try to bring as many people on as possible. I think advice I would give is it's perseverance, like you said, right? I think getting in, sticking to it. I think, and also I didn't study that much, but I did study color theory, costume history, and pattern drafting, and what else can I say? But you know what I mean. So I have a really good understanding about what construction, and also history of clothing, and I think things like that. And I think some of those things, whether it's self-taught or you go out and take school classes and learn it, it's good to have some of those things to get into costume design for sure, because that helps you, in your journey, and having that knowledge when you're doing especially period shows, because you don't know what you're going to end up working on, and you could be doing, like this year alone, I went from 1823, and then I just finished doing, On the Rocks, which was 1967 to 1970. Well, actually, I think I did it. No, we didn't do anything we did to 74. So, knowing those, and then now I'm going to do contemporary. So it's like, those different worlds are all things that are, they're quite different in terms of shapes and silhouettes and so on. So it's good to know those different things, like to have some knowledge of that. And also textiles, that's the other one I missed. So that when you are coming into this business, I think that those things are all really important. If you can.
Getting the basic foundation, if you can understand it.
Yeah, they are the basic foundations, because you can learn a lot, but I feel like, because then there's this other whole world about making a movie and what a set is like, and, liaisoning with all the different departments and so on and so forth. So that is another whole machine. And films and projects need to be so big nowadays. Your crews are like 40 people deep. So it's, and all different departments have crews that big. So you're liaisoning with much more people. So I think, having those foundations is a good starting point for sure. So.
Got it. All right. But we want to say thank you so much for coming in the show and, sharing your wisdom and giving us the opportunity. Greatly appreciated.
Terrific.
Yeah,
well, thanks for having me. It was a fun conversation, and I learned stuff too, which I love. Always learning, which is great.
And now when you want to block out the negativity, you can listen to our podcast with your music.
Yes. Actually, that is
a great concept.
I forgot that I do that too. Actually, I listen to podcasts and books and things online too. So that's another good thing. Sure, that.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks very much. Lovely to meet you guys.
Absolute pleasure.
All right. Take care.